Okay, lucky me. Lucky me. This is the video where I get to crow like a rooster and gloat. I had two sources early on, a little over a year ago, that told me that the sensor inside the Nikon D850 is a Tower Jazz sensor. Yeah, Tower Jazz, Israeli company. I bought out some Panasonic foundries, and they're sinking God knows how many billions of dollars into new chip foundries for silicon wafer lithography. But it turned out, and I had a talk, and I'm allowed to quote him today because I had a really long conversation with Dan, who works with camera sensors. And what is his credibility, by the way? That's the first thing you're going to ask. Well, he actually produced infrared conversion cameras for Fujifilm. In other words, Fujifilm, the large conglomerate that it is, actually went to him, and there's a source for this even on Wikipedia, for the production of special infrared cameras for police departments. I think it was like the SX70 Fujifilm camera. So, yeah. Anyway, what he knows about camera sensors is extremely extensive, far more than me. I mean, a million times more than me, and God knows. Anyway, his credibility is unapproachable on this, and long conversation I had with him yesterday. His sources tell him that the sensor in the Nikon D850 is, in fact, a Tower Jazz sensor. And I said, hold up a minute now. The rumor site for Nikon, I hope you're listening, and I'm sure he is, because someone's going to point him to this video. By the way, send him a link to this video, the guy that runs the rumor site. As well as, it was SLR Lounge. They cited a source that was ChipMod that looked at the back of the sensor, and they saw there was a code IMX309AQJ and 1183456, and this is on a Sony spec sheet, saying, well, this proves it right here. This is a Sony sensor. And I knew this, but I didn't put two and two together. And my two sources for the fact that the Nikon D850 sensor is, in fact, the damn Tower Jazz sensor are unapproachable. And Dan is even way more unapproachable than those two. And his sources tell him it is, in fact, a Tower Jazz sensor. Now, wait, what about those codes that show up on a Sony spec sheet? Well, Sony finished up the production of the sensor. You see the back of this sensor is a viable Nikon D500. So you see this chipset back here for analog to digital conversion? They ordered, and by the way, there's a video on YouTube. Someone sent me a link to it, but you can find it really easy, and someone's going to put a link below, where the Tower Jazz president, or one of the executive tech guys, way up on the food chain said, I hear you're making sensors for Sony, and he said, I'm not allowed to talk about that. They are. What Dan told me yesterday, and he said I could quote him on this, when I said, well, with all these people, like the rumor site for Nikon and SLR Lounge, so they found this code on the back, this serial set IMX309AQ. He's right. He said, but these people are clueless as to how the hell camera sensors are made. The foundry actually produced the silicon wafer lithography, Tower Jazz, for Sony. In other words, Sony outfarmed the production of the actual chip itself, okay? Now, a sensor is not just a silicon wafer. I collect silicon wafers, by the way, because they're really cool. That's the actual sensor itself. But the actual finalized production, where they actually slice and dice, because they come in platters, depends on the size, like 6-inch, 8-inch, 12. I think most silicon wafer lithography for camera sensors on full frame are 8-inch platters, but irrespective of that, Sony ordered the silicon wafer lithography from Tower Jazz, who had the foundry to produce the BSI. By the way, Tower Jazz has been producing BSI sensors. I have the documentation on this if you want a link, since 2003, I believe, or 2013. They announced it in 2003, one of the mentions of that, but they go full production 2013. That's 6 years ago. Anyway, he told me these people are clueless. Okay? His words, clueless. They have no idea, because since they found the Sony code on the back of the sensor, where we actually see, I don't know if you can see this in this video, you see all those nice little, right? The analog digital converters, and then the actual wiring harness that actually plugs into the silicon wafer lithography, which measures the voltage. So it is a Sony sensor, but not really. The actual sensor itself, the actual silicon wafer platter, is made by TowerJazz. So I was right the whole damn time. It is a TowerJazz sensor in your Nikon D850, but Sony did the wiring structure and soldered the PCB board on the back and the flexi cables. So, and that's where they actually have the Sony codes. Sony did finalize the sensor, but it is still the important part, the part that actually is the BSI sensor and the photo sites and, yeah, the CFA and the micro lens, yeah, TowerJazz sensor. So I was right the entire time. So the information I got is TowerJazz is making the wafer and Sony is fabbing the final sensor. He got that information from multiple sources. One of them is changed names. It used to be ChipWorks, and now it's called Tech Support, or no, Tech Supply, or something like that. Chip mod and analyze sensor. Oh, chip mod, analyze sensor, and the bonding pattern. Yeah, okay. Bunch of technical stuff you don't care about, but he said I could quote him on this. Blah, 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 blah. So, when the rumor site for Nikon and SLR Lounge reported from chip mod, the numbers on the back, well, that's Sony. That's Sony numbering. This is a Sony sensor. And that's really stupid because that's exactly a perfect example, like a Harley Davidson, which I absolutely can't stand them because they're crap motorcycles. Like 60% of a Harley Davidson is not made in the USA. And it would be like, well, Harley Davidson must have made this carburetor, this engine, because it's a Harley Davidson. So it's right here, Harley Davidson, MJ, whatever, whatever. But no. And that's the case with cameras, like even on Fujifilm. The sensor in this XT30, it's like, well, this camera is made in the Philippines. I think the XT30 is actually assembled. People don't understand the difference between made in and assembled in. I think XT30 was, yeah, Philippines. I remember it was the Philippines or China. Yeah, China. On the XT30, China. Well, yeah, but the sensor is from Japan. Okay? The sensor is from Japan. Same sensor is found in the XT3, excuse me. And I think the main board is also made in China. The shutter mech, I think all the shutter mechs are made in the Philippines, but I think most of them are made in Japan. But the parts, the only thing that's really expensive is labor of assembly. So we say made in China, but it's not made in China. The sensor is made in Japan. It's the same thing with this. Okay? So all of these idiot websites out there say, well, it proves it's a Sony sensor. That guy on YouTube, the tattooed monkey, was wrong. It's not a TowerJazz. It is a TowerJazz sensor. So all Nikon fanboys rejoice. You know, because, and all the Sony fans, well, there's a Sony sensor in your Nikon D850. Or it's not. It's a TowerJazz sensor. Yeah? It's a TowerJazz sensor. Interestingly enough, and I mentioned this in several other videos, TowerJazz is an Israeli company, and the reason why they want to chip, and I'm not pointing out, singling out the Israelis, because the Americans do this as well, every major company does. Most people don't realize that the serious use of sensor technology is not for cameras. It's used in, you've seen the semi-transparent domes of like surface-to-air missiles and air-to-air missiles and rockets and bombs. This is where the sensors are mostly used. When actually like a fighter jet launches an air-to-air or air-to-ground missile or rocket or bomb, there's these neat little things in the nose cones, and they have they're mirrored, and there's sensors in there. That's actually one of the main uses of silicon wafer lithography is hardcore advanced weaponry. That's the reason why TowerJazz owns some silicon wafer lithography foundries, as they call them. So yes, the tattooed monkey was right all the time. Let me crow a little bit. It is a TowerJazz sensor in your Nikon D850. I was right the whole time. The other people were right and said, well, it says back here it's Sony. Sony finalized the production of this. This is a sensor. This is plucked from a Nikon D500, by the way. It's a good sensor. It's like, well, this is a Sony sensor. Yes and no. I mean, in the case of the D850, because the sensor is this and this and this. So, but the actual part that the light is striking and is registering the voltage, it's a TowerJazz sensor in your Nikon D850. Have I said that enough? Oh, thank you so very much. I was right the whole time. If you like these videos, you could always click the link below, drop me a buck or two, tell me to jump off a cliff, but the tattooed monkey was right. Right the whole time. Okay? So that's interesting about this. See, I was right and they were right. Well, it's a Sony Sensor. They're kind of right. It's a Sony Sensor. Kind of, but not really. But I was ultimately right because the actual sensor, yeah, the front part, yeah, part that's actually registering the light, it's not a Sony Sensor in your Nikon D850. Boom! Boom. Mic drop.